I'm Nadine Brandes, the author of FAWKES, ROMANOV, and the Out of Time series, and today I wanted to come to you to celebrate hitting 1,000 subscribers on YouTube! Woohoo! It's not about numbers, but it's exciting to hit a milestone, and I'm so thankful for each and every one of you who puts up with my ridiculous dorkiness. I mean, there are 1,000 of you who are tolerating this face. To celebrate, I asked on Instagram, how should I celebrate? And a lot of people said they wanted a 1K Q&A. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to answer your questions that you asked on Instagram, and I'm going to do them really quickly because you guys asked a lot of questions. I have questions about writing and publishing, editing, marketing, fun stuff, and life. Baby Brandes, my tiny house that my husband and I are building. Are you ready? How is your tiny house coming? Some of you may not know this, but my husband and I are building a tiny house. We're hoping to complete it within the next year and then move in. Do I know what that's going to look like? No. How are you going to fit all of your books in your tiny house, Nadine? There will be so many shelves in the tiny house. It's going to look amazing, but I'm also trying to pare down my book buying and some of the books that I own. When did we decide that we wanted to live in the tiny house? We first had the idea probably 4 years ago, and we are still just as excited about it today as we were 4 years ago. So we have spent many years planning and prepping and really thinking it through and our reasons behind it, and that's a whole nother video. So those are the tiny house questions. Now on to Baby Brandes, also known as Halfling. Have we decided on a baby name yet? Yes, and I'm not going to be sharing it until we have the baby. I'm also filming this video before I've had the baby, but I'm pretty sure that I'll be posting it after I've had the baby. So this question may be obsolete now because you guys may already know the baby's name via my social media. I did have to film in advance so that I can take a couple weeks off when baby comes and trying to figure out how to keep another human alive. Can we send you baby gifts? Which is super sweet of you guys to ask. And of course you can send me baby gifts. I love hearing from you guys, seeing pictures of your faces. That's always really precious to me. So my author address is below. All right, writing and publishing. When did you know for sure that you wanted to be a writer? I always loved writing stories, and I never really thought of it as a career until I hit college, and then I thought, I might actually want to be published instead of just writing these stories for fun. And then after I graduated with my master's degree, not in writing, I pursued publishing full-time, and here I am. How and when did you know that it was time to be a full-time writer? For me, it wasn't that I had this 5-year plan. Writing is very, very difficult to make a living off of. For me, it was a very internal, emotional, and spiritual process of realizing that I had this passion for storytelling, and I wanted to continue diving into that passion for the rest of my life. And if that actually led to publication, that would be great. So when I was 25, I graduated with a different degree that was not writing related, and I came to the crossroads of either following that degree in that profession or pursuing my passion for writing. And that was when I decided that I wanted to be a writer. If you're passionate about writing, keep writing, keep letting out that love and that passion, and then when it's time for you to make it a career, if that's your desire, hopefully you have some finished manuscripts that you can pitch. What did I want to be before I became a writer? And what was my career goal? I went to college to become a speech therapist, and I'm so thankful that I studied that for 6 years. But I had multiple passions, but writing was my greatest passion, and thankfully life opened up in that I could pursue that. Have either of your books stemmed from NaNoWriMo? I actually have 5 published novels. None of them stemmed from NaNoWriMo. I do Nano every single year for motivation, but I've never actually won. If I already know I want my story to be different, do I finish the first draft and revise, or do I start over? So I actually kind of cover this in another video about editing as you go, which I will link down below. But if you already know that there's something that you want to change in your story and it's a big change, I say go ahead and go back and apply that change. If you find yourself doing that over and over and over and you're never finishing a manuscript, it might be better to try and finish the manuscript first so that you do have a completed manuscript that then you can tweak. Which book was hardest for me to write? And the answer to that is FAWKES. I'd never written historical, I'd never written fantasy, and so there was tons of research and so much to learn. I'd never written a standalone. I was doing a lot of very new things that I had never done as a writer on deadline. Bah! Which book was my favorite to write? And that is A Time to Speak. This is the second book in my Out of Time trilogy. The world had already been established. The characters had already been established. I knew the entire plot of this book going into it, and I just couldn't wait to tell the story, and it came out exactly how I wanted it to come out. Do I want to continue writing retellings, or am I going to branch out a little bit? If I'm going to do another retelling, it has to be the right piece of history, the right story that I'm really, really passionate about. I do have several novels that I would like to write that are more in the fantasy side of things, so you're just gonna have to wait and see. Which books inspired me to write? The first is the Harry Potter series, which was very influential in my life when I was a teen. That showed me how powerful fantasy novels can be, and just imagination and adventure and all of that. Then I read the Blood of Kings trilogy by Jill Williamson, which is a fantasy series that I love, and it really showed me how fiction can actually change your life. These books really inspired me to want to write something that could impact other people's lives. Which books intimidate me and make me feel like I can't write? I try not to play the comparison game. I have to remind myself that I have my own style, I have my own writing, I have my own stories to tell that only I can tell in the way that I write. In fact, I actually try to let those books inspire me to go write and to go grow as a writer. But some books that do intimidate me, pretty much anything by V.E. Schwab, because her writing is so brilliant, and I think, wow, my brain will never work that way. And I hope that as a writer, you can start training your brain to understand that you bring a style to the writing world that no other author can bring. What is a genre that I will never write? Horror or thriller, they're just too intense for me to read, and I can't imagine trying to write one. I don't watch horror films or TV shows. It's just an entire genre that is not for me. Have I written a character trait, skill, or appearance into existence in my own life? I have written aspects of stories that have affected and changed my life and my thinking. Specifically, with A Time to Die, this tackles how would you live if you knew the day that you would die. I wrote 3 books around that topic, so obviously it made me think about how would I live if I knew the day that I was going to die, which has actually been really cool. Most discouraging moment as a writer. That was the first time I got a professional edit done on A Time to Die. It wasn't the whole book, it was just the first chapter. It was by a professional who I really admired. The notes were really thorough, but I was so attached to this book. I was sure he hated it. I was just mortified. That's actually a very common feeling for authors when they get edits back. It can feel very personal, but that was the first step in me learning that an edit is a professional step in the writing career. I had to brave those waters and realize it's not personal, it's just trying to make my story better, and it did make my story better. Even now, 5 books down the road, I still cringe and have a hard time getting the edits back from my editor, and it's just something that you have to mentally prepare yourself for. How exactly do I start a book? Do I use an outline? It depends on the book. Generally, I have an idea in my head of where I want it to start, end, and all of the big points in the middle, and I will just sit down and write it. Which brings me to the next question, plotter or pantser? I'm definitely a pantser. If I do an outline, it will be like a little bullet pointed thing. How did I find my agent? At a conference. I was not agented when my first book got published. So I went to a writer's conference and I met my agent there. We had coffee and talked about my writing and my goals, and then she offered me representation. Since then, she has stopped agenting and I got another agent who was part of the same agency. Am I planning another book? Yeah, of course. What was the earliest story I wrote about? Well, I wrote as a kid, and I'm pretty sure my first book was The Invisible Dad. It was epic, and that was my first story. What's a genre I would love trying to write someday? Contemporary. I've had a couple ideas. Who knows? Contemporary might be in the books someday in the far, far future. Do I use a pen name? Nope. How long did it take me to write my first book, and how long did it take me to write my last book? So this really depends on my contract and deadlines. Before it was contracted, I spent 3.5 years on this book, and then it got contracted and then published. Romanov was contracted before I even started writing it, and I wrote the first draft in about 3 months. This does not mean I'm a fast writer. It does not mean I like writing a book in 3 months. Typically, your first book does take longer. I would much rather have a full year to draft a book, but that's just not really possible with the publishing timelines that exist. How did I stay positive and hopeful about my works in progress before I was published? Tosca Lee has a quote that I love, and she says, "Write as though no one will ever read it." Because then it makes you write for yourself. It makes you write for the story. It lets you just have fun. That doesn't mean that discouragement and comparison never creeps in. Of course it does. But I like to approach every story as though it's meant to be written. I'm the one who's meant to write it. It's because I love my readers. It's because I love writing. It's because God has given me a passion for writing. And as long as I'm writing it without this giant agenda of I have to get published, I have to make money, it has to be amazing, it has to hit the New York Times bestseller list, I'm able to stay more positive about my works in progress because I'm writing them for the story. But it takes a lot of diligence and practice to take control of your mind. So whenever I'm getting super discouraged, I'll usually go and journal, and then that helps redirect my focus into why I'm writing. How do I balance everything in my life with writing? Trial and error. I have trouble balancing it. I think every author does. But I'm always studying myself and figuring out how much time needs to be spent writing, how much time needs to be spent marketing, and then of course taking care of my husband and being a homemaker, which my husband does not expect me to do that. I like doing it, and so that's a priority to me. And now, coming up, being a mom, everything's gonna start over. So I'm gonna have to learn new balance and new rhythms, but it has taken me a couple years to really figure out how to balance everything. So if you don't have it all balanced from the start, that's okay. Trial and error. Keep figuring out what works, what doesn't work, and adjust that. What does my writing process look like? How do I start? How do I set up? Outlining, brainstorming, prepping, what does all of that look like? And this actually has to be another video on its own. Usually it starts with brainstorming a story and then trying to put it all together so that it makes sense. Would I ever write a book having something to do with the Christian faith? A lot of you may not know this, but my Out of Time series was published with a CBA publisher. What that means is a publisher that publishes for Christian shelves, for readers of the Christian faith, because that is my faith. I believe in Jesus Christ, and so I was very passionate about writing a story about a girl who asked all of the questions that I asked as a teen when I was growing up, trying to figure out how I felt about God or Jesus or what that meant. And so I actually have a series out that is with a Christian publisher, and that's the Out of Time series. FAWKES and ROMANOV are with a publisher that puts young adult books on the general market shelves. These books are from my heart, so there's going to be threads of what I believe and my worldview in them, just like every book that's ever written has threads of the worldview of that author. Short answer, already done. What was my inspiration for A Time to Die? Well, this is about a world where everybody has a clock telling them how long they have to live, and she only has 1 year left at the start of the story. I was inspired actually by the death of an acquaintance of mine who was my same age, and it made me start thinking, what if I knew I was gonna die in a year? Would that change how I live? So that inspired the entire trilogy. What's my favorite season for stories to be set in or for me to write in? Generally, I just write stories where I feel like they need to be set. I enjoy writing descriptions for all of the seasons, really. Okay, how do I come up with my amazing book ideas? I was actually really flattered that several of you asked that question. I like to just look at something in the world and ask a question about it, like, what if we all knew we were gonna die? What if Guy Fawkes had a son? Romanov, what if... Well, I can't tell you that because that's a spoiler. I usually like asking the what if question because it makes me think more about my life, and then usually I'm processing something that I'm passionate about in story form and it comes out as a book. What is my #1 tip for teen writers? It's actually my #1 tip for any writer, no matter your age, and that is to be teachable. It's really hard when you're so emotionally attached to a story, but being teachable and being willing to learn from editors, from other writers, from agents, and to take feedback with an open mind is so healthy, and it will help you be a better writer. What are some tips for some newbie writers starting their very first novel? I'm gonna do an entire other video on writing tips for new writers, but my biggest tip right now would be to finish the manuscript, because you can't start really honing your craft until you have a completed manuscript to start editing and working on and learning from. Do you ever find yourself thinking in your writing style? Yes, I do. Not just thinking, also talking out loud, alone, in my house. What did my research process look like for FAWKES and ROMANOV, and were they different from each other? Well, I actually just did a video about how I researched FAWKES, and I will link to that video below. And then I will do a video on how I researched ROMANOV in the future, but the core approach was the same. How do I find inspiration to write? For actually getting into like the writing zone and feeling inspired to sit down and write, I did just do a video on that. I will link below. How do I know which story ideas are novel material and which ones aren't? I don't take an idea actually to paper until I feel like it has a full plot, it has a start and a finish, and I have all of the characters in my head. Who are some of my favorite characters I've created? Solomon Hawk from the Out of Time series, and also Willow. Emma Arabin from FAWKES, and Yvonne from ROMANOV. I chose side characters because obviously I love all of my main characters, so you can just assume that I love Parvin, Thomas, and Nastya a whole lot. What is my favorite thing about being a published author? I hope this doesn't sound cheesy, but it's coming like right from my heart. My favorite thing about being a published author is connecting with my readers, with you guys. That's why I write. I want to share story. It's exciting to see my book on shelves, yes. But if that was all it was, and I never got to connect with anybody reading my stories, it would just feel so incomplete. After I wrote my first series, why did I decide to go with a different publisher for FAWKES? I was with Enclave Publishing for the Out of Time series, and I'm with Thomas Nelson HarperCollins for FAWKES and ROMANOV. First of all, I loved working with Enclave. Enclave mainly got my books to the CBA readers. That's great because that's who I wrote these books for, but I really wanted to write books that would actually end up on the young adult shelves. It was just a stepping stone. They're also a smaller publishing house, so their reach can only go so far. Whereas HarperCollins has many contacts and resources, so really this was me jumping in 100% young adult, whereas my first series was me just figuring out the market that I was passionate to write for. I've completed my manuscript. Should I start the sequel? First of all, congratulations for completing your manuscript. I say it's good to set aside a completed manuscript and let it sit for a while. Go ahead and start the sequel. If you're wanting to query and just start pitching your book to publishers and agents right now, then you might want to continue working on book one and getting it as tight as you possibly can. But if it's as tight as you can get it and you're just waiting to hear back from agents and publishers, why not start on the sequel? How do you start a new book when you were so in love with your last one? It can be hard. I really don't know that I have an answer to this question other than just try starting your next story idea. If you're not excited about a story idea, maybe that's not the story that you're supposed to be writing. What inspired ROMANOV? My love for the movie Anastasia. I have traveled to Russia many times in my life, studied Russian in high school. I have many friends over there. That really inspired me to dig into a piece of their history that I've always been curious about. I can't tell you what inspired the actual plot because that's a secret until the book comes out, which is in May. You can pre-order it down below. Where do I find most of my inspiration for writing characters? From people. People watching, like a creepy person. Personally, characters are the hardest thing to write for me. I'm chipping away at them through every single editing pass, but most of my inspiration usually comes from real life and from real questions and real heartache that I try to embody in a character that can represent that. How do you start the publishing process? I can only really speak into the traditional side of things. The way you start publishing is first you write your book. But let's say that your book is completely written and it's polished and it's edited and you think that it's ready for professional eyes. That is when you start querying agents. What is my favorite classic? Les Mis by Victor Hugo. I've read this gigantic, huge, unabridged version of it. I'm not a fan of the movie. That's all you need to know. Who is your favorite classic author? Jane Austen, even though I've only actually read one of her books, so I might have to come back to this question after I've read more classics. Blech. Have I ever read the Queen's Thief series by Megan Whalen Turner? No, I have not, but now it's on my TBR. Which Harry Potter book is my favorite? Goblet of Fire. What is my least favorite book or YA trope? Insta-love. I hate insta-love. It's so unreal. When I met my husband, I felt like all of the books got it wrong. That's not what romance looks like, because I felt like my experience with my husband, Mr. Ninja, was so much better than any book had ever captured. And the whole insta-love thing just creates the wrong expectations, the wrong idea of what romance and relationship looks like. I have to stop before I get on a soapbox. Why do I love the books that I do. The things that make a book my favorite is a really, really rich culture, like Harry Potter, Children of Blood and Bone by Tomi Adeyemi, Wrath and the Dawn. I also love books that have powerful messages, especially the ones that I can remember exactly where I was when I first sat down and read them, like Hunger Games and Ember in the Ashes and Harry Potter. And I also love a book that makes me think about hard topics or about new topics. And it's not just entertainment. A lot of people read books just to be entertained, and that's totally fine. That's just not how I read them. I love letting books affect my life. What's my favorite Narnia book? Probably The Magician's Nephew. I also really like Voyage of the Dawn Treader and Silverchair. Oh, and The Horse and His Boy. I love them all, you guys! What advice would I give someone who's trying to get into the editing business? Figure out what type of edits are your strong points. I did a video on the different types of edits. I will link that below. And then also learn what edits look like. And a way to do that is to have your own work edited. How long does editing typically take? And do I work on the next project while I edit? And that really depends on the deadlines that my publisher gives me. The first one usually takes a good month or two, and then the next one takes 3 to 4 weeks, and then the next one 2 weeks, and then the next one 1 week. I do not work on other projects while I am editing a different project because I can't split my brain into 2 different stories or 2 different projects. It's just too much for me. How much time do I invest in marketing, and what is my advice? That's a whole nother video in itself that I am going to do, but I will say I commit about 30 minutes to an hour per day, or if I'm on deadline, I will do 4 days of writing and then have 1 day for planning out and prepping all of my marketing stuff. It does take work to balance it all out. How do you make book friends? So for me, all of my friends have come from connecting online and through social media. Putting myself out there and just being relational. That's the beauty of social media, that you can find people who love and read and write what you love and read and write, and you can connect with them there. Where do I keep the books on my bookshelf when I switch seasons? They actually just stay on my bookshelf. I don't change the books around, I change all of the decorations. Advice for my younger self: be confident in who I have been created to be. That doesn't mean that I'm saying like, stay who you are, Nadine, is like a 12-year-old. Being confident in the fact that I've been created for a purpose and that my life has power to change this world and benefit this world. Faith is such a huge part of my writing that my advice to my younger self would be, get serious about Jesus a little bit sooner. I went through a lot of dark times and trials and just identity issues that could have been easier if I had truly understood who I am in Christ. What's my favorite Bible verse? I love the entire Bible, but right now one of my favorite verses is Exodus 14:14, and it says, "The Lord will fight for you. You need only be still." I feel like I have such a hard time just being still and breathing and trusting that when I'm in a trial or a battle or just something that is completely draining me and eating away at my mind, and He's powerful enough to help me get through that. Do I prefer reading or writing? Definitely both. That's cheating. What am I most excited about for 2019? There are a lot of things I'm excited about, but a big one is learning how to be a mom, hopefully being a good one. I'm also very, very excited for the release of Romanov. If I could guest star on any TV show, what would it be? Probably Merlin. On a scale of 1 to 9,000, how strong is Mr. Ninja? And the answer is Aragorn. If I could adopt a fictional character into my family, who would it be? Neville. Little Neville. His grandmother's so scary. I would take him in. Thank you so much for sitting through this very, very long Q&A video, but even more so, thank you for asking all of these questions. I love connecting with you. So if there's a question that has popped into your head, put that below and I will try to answer it. As always, if you want to keep up on my videos where I talk writing and publishing and all of the bookish things, please click subscribe or the little bell icon that gives you an email alert every time I post a new video. So with that, tally ho!